Well, good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM. There's been a issue in Mississauga that's been really quite topical for a lot of people, and that is the issue of a minister pastor at a Baptist church who has decided that she is a transgendered individual, and the congregation has not responded favorably. Actually, it's been split. And I was interested in that topic, and we're actually going to be interviewing that pastor shortly. But Reverend Brent Hawkes, who is a retired minister of Metropolitan Community Church in Toronto, and a renowned minister, someone who has been very vocal on issues of social justice and equal rights and LGBT issues, etc., and someone who I think I heard you do an incredible eulogy once, and would love to talk to you about that as well if possible, but has come out strongly on this issue. And so, Reverend Hawkes, welcome to our show. How are you today, sir?
Great. Thanks for having me.
So please tell my listeners, if you could, what the issue is here.
Sure. Reverend Joplin has been the pastor of this Baptist church, I think, for a little over 6 years, well loved by the congregation, and has been transitioning from male to female. And so she came out on one of her sermons during COVID. So it was a video sermon, and came out to the congregation as part of that process. And as a result of that, the congregation went through a period of discernment to say, okay, what do we do now? And by, I think, a vote of something like 52% to 48% decided to end their contract with her, i.e. fire her. And so it got a lot of coverage when she first came out, and got even more coverage in the media when she was basically fired by the congregation.
And what do you think the right result is here?
Well, I think two things. One, it's very sad that she was fired because people had 6 years of experience of her ministry, that what she was like in terms of her integrity, her compassion, her kindness, etc., none of which is going to change. And the fact that she's transgendered. So the kind of minister that she was would have continued, right? And so it was sad that they fired her, and they decided not to continue the kind of relationship they had with her. But secondly, there's a lot of hope in this, because 48% of the congregation approximately voted to keep her as their pastor. And for a lot of people in society, dealing with transgender issues is difficult. It's relatively new for most people, and they have a hard time coping with the concept of someone they knew as male is now female, and how do they deal with that? And then it gets all messed up too with the kind of moralism that you have in many faith communities. And so Christianity is not unlike most of the world's major religions. There's lots of issues that they wrestle with in terms of how do they view that today. And whether it's women as ministers, or people getting divorced, or people having a beer, there's just so many issues. And certainly the thing I'm most familiar with down through the last 40 years plus is people dealing with those who were gay or lesbian. And so that was a big challenge for many people. It's getting easier, but transgender issues are relatively new for most people, and they're struggling with it.
So I actually had a dinner party at my house a little while ago, and some members of the Baptist church were in attendance, and they mentioned a couple of things, which was interesting to me. Number one, they commented that if this was the United Church or the Presbyterian Church, it might not have been such an issue, but it was shocking within the Baptist church. So that was one issue. I'm not sure what you might think about that. And then the second thing they said is that, and it's sort of to your comment about transitioning. They said that she wasn't transitioning, that it was an abrupt change, and that it was they said what the right way would have been for her to have come out to maybe the elders or to a board meeting or something like that. But it was all of a sudden a shock at the end of a service, at the end of a sermon. And so it was a very abrupt, was what they thought, and shocking the way they described it.
Yeah, 2 points. I think that certainly, I was raised a strict fundamentalist Baptist, so I have a little bit of familiarity with the Baptist culture. But however, there are an increasing number of Baptist churches across Canada that are breaking with the traditional Baptist structure and traditional Baptist beliefs, and are openly embracing gay and lesbian people as members of their congregation, for instance. And so, within the Baptist tradition, I think there would have been some congregations who would have viewed this differently. And but in terms of how she did it and whether it was abrupt or not, again, I don't know all the details. I don't know whether she started talking to some members of the congregation that she trusted and began to increase her circles, and then feeling she had to come out to the general congregation. I'm not sure what led her to that moment, but I do know for many people who are gay or lesbian, for instance, some people do come out gradually to the people that they trust, and other people just decide, okay, today's the day. I got to be honest. I can't live this lie. I can't live this life anymore. And so, yeah, some people may have not been as comfortable with the abruptness. They maybe wish that she had sat down with them and one-on-one and told them. And people may have different reactions, but that doesn't justify firing. That justifies saying, hey, June, I wish you'd done this a little bit differently. It would have been easier if. And so, when the congregation had to vote, they weren't voting on whether they wish she had done it differently. They voted whether to fire her.
Right.
And so, people could have differed with how she did it, but still supported her staying on as the pastor of the church.
We're chatting tonight with Reverend Brent Hawkes of the Metropolitan Community Church, a retired minister of the Metropolitan Community Church in downtown Toronto. And we're discussing Reverend Junia Joplin, who came out transgendered as a female. She used to be a male and was hired as a male at the Baptist Church. I don't remember the name of the Baptist Church. It's in Clarkson, is it not?
I've just gone blank too.
I think it's the Clarkson Baptist Church or something like that. It's on Lakeshore Road in Clarkson. Anyway, it's quite controversial and interesting. And as Reverend Hawkes has mentioned, the congregation did vote to dismiss her by a very slight majority. And so it's kind of interesting to see what's going to happen. We're going to take a break for some messages and come right back in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, good evening and welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Reverend Brent Hawkes, retired minister of Metropolitan Community Church in downtown Toronto. And we're talking about the Reverend Junia Joplin, who came out as female, used to be male, at a Baptist church in Mississauga recently, and was fired by her congregation. And Reverend Hawkes has come out strongly that it was inappropriate that she lose her pastorship over this. And Reverend Hawkes, I think what you said is that she was well liked by her congregation for the prior 6 years. They got to know her well. And so, it is interesting that someone, because they come out as transgendered, would get fired. You must have had experience previously with people that come out as gay or as lesbian through the piece. Have they had similar problems with congregations, or have they've been accepted?
Certainly, they've had similar problems and still do in many denominations. If you came out as gay or lesbian, you would be fired still. And it's perfectly legal. I'm not saying it's right, but it's perfectly legal in Canada to do so, because our human rights codes in Canada have exemptions for faith communities. And so faith community, for instance, a Catholic church doesn't have to hire women priests. And so faith communities are exempt from the human rights codes. And so, in the past, it's been difficult in all the world's major religions and in all the Christian denominations in North America. Some are changing. You have you have the United Church of Canada, the largest Protestant denomination in Canada that welcomes gay and lesbian pastors. The Presbyterian Church in Canada just recently made a decision to welcome into full membership and into being clergy in their denomination. And so it's changing. That the Anglicans are still wrestling with the issue. So the churches are in transition as more and more people come out and people get to know people and then have to make a decision about whether to continue to keep them as pastors or not.
Metropolitan Community Church has been renowned as one of those most welcoming churches in all of Toronto, frankly, to people of all different sexual orientations. You said that you were raised as a devout Baptist. What led you to Metropolitan Community Church, and why is it that you've sort of established the position that you've established?
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about my history and a little bit about the history of our denomination, Metropolitan Community Churches. So I was, born in 1950 and raised, as I said, a strict fundamentalist Baptist. I knew that I was gay from a very early age, but in those days, I didn't know anyone else who was gay. There was no gay people. There were no gay people on TV. There were no gay organizations that I knew of. I thought I was the only person like this in the world. And so I prayed and prayed and prayed for God to take away these feelings, but they didn't go away. And so in high school, I felt called to ministry, and I had to make a decision. Do I go to Acadia University and become a Baptist minister, or do I go to another university and take up another profession? And I really felt like I could not be a Baptist minister and be gay, that I couldn't just buy the party line, and that it would not work. And so I made the decision not to go to Acadia and become a Baptist minister. And I felt like I was abandoning my best friend. I felt like I was saying no to God. And so instead, I went to Mount Allison University and I got a Bachelor of Science degree and a Bachelor of Education degree. And so eventually, I found out about Metropolitan Community Churches. They were founded in 1968 in California by the Reverend Troy Perry. And he was a Pentecostal minister and felt a call to start a Christian, felt a call of God, to start a Christian church where gay and lesbian people were welcomed and wouldn't be discriminated against. And so he started what he thought would be one church in Los Angeles. But it grew very quickly, and people would visit LA and then started a church in Chicago and Miami, London, England. And a group of people from Toronto heard about the church and wrote to have a church started in Toronto. And so a minister, the Reverend Bob Wolf, was sent to Toronto in 1973 to be the first pastor to start the church and to be the first pastor here in Toronto. And I found out about the church in 1976 and moved to Toronto. I visited the church in beginning of 1977. And the pastor, Bob Wolf, after we chatted for a while, he said to me, "Brent, you need to move to Toronto and find your people." And so I moved to Toronto at 1976, in the fall of 1976. And I became the pastor of the church in 1977 when he left. And the successor pastor didn't quite work out, and he left. And so the church hired me in August of 1977. And I've been the pastor ever since. I was the pastor ever since until I retired a couple of years ago after 40 years. It's an amazing church. When it was founded, it was called the Gay Church. We didn't like that phrase because from the very beginning, heterosexual people were welcomed into the church. And there were heterosexual ministers in our denomination. It's grown now. And I think there's about 140 metropolitan community churches in about 30 countries around the world. Most of them are predominantly LGBT. But many of them, like the church in Toronto had a significant number of friends and family members who would come and say, "Hey, this is a pretty neat place. I like this church," and would call it their own church home and stay and continue to attend. So yes, it's very accepting, obviously, of LGBT people around the world. But it's also a very progressive church in terms of welcoming diversity beyond just sexual orientations. And so it was quite an exciting place to be the pastor.
I think of myself as a reasonably progressive person, and homosexuality, gay, lesbian is something that we've lived with and accepted for a long period of time. But transgender is sort of something new, is it not?
Well, it's new in terms of the public discourse, right? There have always been people who felt that they were, quote unquote, born in the wrong body, who felt more, for instance, if they were born male, felt more female than male, and felt disconnected from their physical body. But there's always been, people with, the range of things from people who cross-dress, transvestites. I remember when I was growing up, there was a man in our community who rumored was that he would dress as a woman in his home in private. And, kids used to go and peek in his window to watch, to try and see if, and they would throw eggs at his house and call him names and so on. And so, I think that, the whole issue of gender and how we view gender is shifting and changing. And it's quite a challenging time, kind of an upheaval in the sense of a lot of our traditional views of how we've looked at things. I know when my sister, for instance, she had twins, a boy and a girl. This was many, many, many years, 25 years ago. And she told all the family she didn't want pink presents for the girl and blue presents for the boy. She didn't want dolls for the girl and trucks for the boy. She wanted them to be able to choose whatever they wanted in terms of color or things that they wanted to play with, etc. And it was kind of comical because as they grew up, the girl became very, she's stunningly beautiful, very effeminate, would choose everything pink, and would choose dolls. And the boy grew up to be a rough and tough hockey player. And so it's, he said to me one time, he said, Uncle Brent, I think sometimes my mother is disappointed that I grew up to be straight. I think that how we view gender and, are things as simple as, you have this male box and female box and people are just born that way and are put in those boxes forever. I think it's being questioned a lot more that not only may there be a spectrum, and such, but are there cases, medical cases, where there's been a dysphoria, a change or a problem at birth, and that people don't relate to the bodies that they have. Indeed, some cases hate the way they were born, and more and more medically that's been recognized in psychology and psychiatry, and more and more it's supported that for some people they want to choose a different gender. But that kind of it does challenge society, frankly, in terms of all of our conceptions of maleness and femaleness, and it's a time of transition, ironically, a time of transitioning or changing our views and challenging those views.
I sort of think that God has created us the way we are, whether we're male, female, or gay, lesbian, transgendered, or whatnot. Why is it, in your mind, that some of the people that have the most difficulty with this are Christians, devout Christians?
Well, yeah, I think sometimes we forget that for most of the world's major religions, the sacred documents that guide us were written thousands of years ago. And you could pick any institution in society. If the medical profession was practicing medicine today using medical books that were 2,000 years old, there'd be some problems. There'd be illnesses that weren't even in those books 2,000 years ago, and some of the ways they would treat things would be seen as barbaric today. Or if the legal profession was using legal documents written 2,000 years ago, that would be a problem. If we taught school the way the education profession was 2,000 years ago, it would be a problem. Yet in religion, we have these sacred documents, and instead of viewing them as history books that guide us, that tell us how the early people of faith lived their lives, we sometimes use them as rule books, and which to me is as problematic as all those other professions if they were using 2,000-year-old documents as rule books. And so, for most of our faith traditions, we view things today through documents of 2,000 years ago, when they didn't understand things. And I'm just going to use, women in the church as an example. I mean, you've got scriptures that say women are to keep silent in church. And so some churches have used that as a rule book statement, and they won't allow women ministers or women priests, right? And so I think we have to be very careful in terms of how we do that. And so for Christianity, there are many issues that Christianity, let's take a look at slavery. I mean, the Christian church has been the biggest supporter of slavery in North America and South Africa. Apartheid was supported when, slave, obey your master is a scripture verse. Now, there's other verses that says there's neither slave nor free. We're all one in Christ Jesus. So if you're going to treat the Bible as a rule book, and if you're going to pick and choose which of those rules you're going to abide by, then you get it, all kinds of things get condemned that shouldn't be condemned. And if we use compassion or love as a guide, we might have a different point of view. But that kind of fundamentalist wing of all of the world's major religions tends to treat their ancient spiritual books as rule books and become very moralistic and judgmental.
Please correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't most of that very fundamental rule book type language in the Old Testament? And did Jesus not accept most everyone, if not everybody?
Yeah, I mean, there's some theologians who said that religion of his day had morphed into being a religion of rules and not a religion of love. And that what Jesus tried to do is to turn Judaism, the religion of his day, to try to turn it back to being a religion about love and not a religion about laws or rules. And so Jesus talked a lot about love your neighbor and judge not, and to try to move that back to a more compassionate, loving religion. And stuff. And so, I mean, obviously, I have a slight bias. I think that's where we should be in terms of religion. We should be letting love set the tone. Certainly, it doesn't mean everything goes, and certainly there There are things that are destructive behaviors or patterns, et cetera, that need to be challenged or condemned. There's no question. But I think we start from that place of love. We start from that place of compassion and openness instead of that place of trying to legislate morality according to your version of morality.
Should the Human Rights Code apply to religions as well?
You know, I get myself in trouble around this one, Brian, because I'm not sure. I think there's a difference between what we legislate and what is right and wrong. And so I think we have to be careful when we take a judgment around what's right and wrong and make it the law. I think, sometimes it's absolutely correct, like for instance, speeding hurts not only the person who's speeding and has an accident, but it hurts the person that they kill, right? And so we say that speeding is wrong.
I think it is wrong to exclude someone from a position just because of their gender.
I agree. I agree it's wrong. But do we want to make it the law? Let me give you another example.
It is the law for companies. It is the law for politics. It's the law for everything else in society.
Not necessarily, because let's just take another example. Should Greenpeace be able to only hire people who support their tenets, or should they be forced to hire someone who holds a different viewpoint? And so I think that I'm not trying to. I think it's absolutely wrong to fire someone for being gay. I think it's absolutely wrong, but do we want to force, for instance, the Catholic Church to have women priests? Do we want to force churches to rent their facilities out to organizations that hold a very different opinion than what they have? To me, it's a little murkier. I think it's wrong for churches to fire people for being gay or transgender. No question. But do I want to force religion to abide by the same rules? Do I want to force organizations to only hire people to be able to hire people who disagree with major parts of their view? I may be wrong on this. There's no question, and maybe I haven't thought this through enough. And maybe religion should have to abide by the same rules that others do. It just opens up to me a deeper discussion, certainly that I need to have to be able to get to a point. But people would probably be surprised for me to say I'm waffling on the issue of should churches have to abide by the Human Rights Code.
So what do you think Reverend Junia Joplin should do? Anything? Does she have any recourse?
Well, I think primarily, I don't know her well. I've been on a couple of programs with her, but I've not sat down, to talk to her. So I can't say that I know her personally. I just hope that she's able to find a safe place to land. I'm very, very impressed with what I see of her as a deeply spiritual, deeply compassionate person of real integrity. And I think, any congregation would be very fortunate to have her as their pastor. And, she's obviously called, I would say she's obviously called of God to be a Christian pastor. And so I hope that she's able to find a Metropolitan Community Church or a United Church, or maybe even a Baptist church that would welcome her. But I think she needs to continue to speak up and to set an example. I believe that one of the reasons why all of us are on this earth is to make the world an easier place for those who will come after us. And so I think that's, hopefully she'll make it easier for younger transgender people to have an easier road by the kind of spiritual example that she's setting.
Well, we're going to take a break for messages, and we're going to be joined by Reverend Junia Joplin, who has been fired by her congregation. And we're going to hear it straight from her as to what she thinks happened and should happen. I want to thank Reverend Brent Hawkes, the retired minister of Metropolitan Community Church in downtown Toronto, for joining us and giving us his point of view. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate meeting you.
Thank you, Brian.
Stay with us.